The teachings of General Conference are the considerations the Lord would have before us now and in the months ahead.
Our marching orders for each 6 months are found in the General Conference addresses.
For the next 6 months, your conference edition of the Ensign should stand next to your standard works and be referred to frequently.
I encourage you to read the talks once again and to ponder the messages contained therein.
I exhort you to study the messages of this conference frequently, even repeatedly, during the next 6 months.
You're listening to the Conference Talk podcast, where it's conference weekend every weekend. Each weekend on this show, we discuss talks from the most recent General Conference of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We'll share some insights, we'll make some connections, and hopefully have a bit of fun. I'm your host, Tommy, and today we'll be discussing No One Sits Alone, Elder Gong's address. And for this episode, I've invited a special guest. Latter-day Truth, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for having me. My name is Latter-day Truth. I'm grad student in Utah, father of 2, husband, served my mission in Russia, and I just love talking about the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. And so happy to talk about Elder Gong's talk today. I think it was a really inspired one and one that's definitely needed today.
Wonderful. Happy to have you here. So we're, of course, keeping your identity secure, I guess. And so we'll refer to you as Joe. Joe is not his real name, but we're going to go by Joe today because Joseph Smith. Why not, right?
Yeah, sounds great to me.
Yeah. So how's the winter treating you so far?
You know, it was really warm, fall weather in Utah, and then yesterday all of a sudden blasted with snow. So nice. It's been good up to this point. Had a good Thanksgiving without too cold weather, and then the snow's arrived. Right in. I mean, I guess we need it, but cold's not. It's not always fun, but it'll be good.
Yeah. No, it's same out here. I'm in the Chicagoland area, and we got like a day or two after cold came in, a foot of snow. Loving it. It's great as long as I stay inside. So.
Yep.
All right. So No One Sits Alone. What were some of the first things that stood out to you as you reviewed the talk?
I loved the approach that Elder Gong took of emphasizing the aspect of the gospel where we're bringing people from all nations and then we're trying to bring them into one. He referenced that our hearts need to be knit together in one, and he talked about covenant belonging. And I think in the world we kind of emphasize, either diversity for diversity's sake, or there's also this other aspect of we all need to be the same. But in the gospel, and especially in Elder Gong's talk, it's let's take the diversity that we have and let's knit our hearts together in one, in that we're creating this covenant belonging and even his spiritual triangulation, where he was saying there doesn't need to be a specific, you don't need to bring everything from your culture, but you can bring some things, bring the good, and we'll all kind of knit it together and we'll create this Zion community. And I thought it was really inspiring, the general idea there that all hearts are knit together in one and we're working towards this greater community that we're going to build.
I was pleasantly pleased by this talk as I reviewed it. I struggle with Elder Gong's talks. So I'm sharing this. So other people, if you feel this way, you're not alone. But I specifically picked his as one I wanted to review because I struggle with them. But I feel like it's a bunch of vignettes that are kind of stitched together. And I'm like, I don't understand the message. And there's some parts about his talk that I'm like, I don't understand how that fits in with it. But like you pointed out, I love the focus on becoming a Zion community. And his approach to delivering that message is different than what I usually see. And it makes me think in different ways. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I love that he points out, like you said, the bringing the different cultures together and that diversity, but it's all focused on that unity. He talks about being converted to Christ, and he even quotes President Oaks.
I struggle with Elder Gong's talks when listening to them too, by the way. But when I read them, I think it's so inspiring when I read them, and I think that just goes over my head when he's given the talk. And when I go back and read it, I'm like, wow, you read the footnotes that they add and things like that. And it's just so impressive and definitely inspired.
Yeah. No, very true. Very true. I can't find the quote, but President Oaks, he quotes President Oaks saying that We have to abandon those parts of our culture that aren't in agreement with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I think that's a point that our modern culture misses with diversity that you pointed out. That the unity is what makes diversity a strength. Only if there's a unity in purpose, a combined focus, we're all moving towards the same thing. Does diversity benefit us? But if not, you just have chaos, Yeah. Wonderful. So I wanted to start towards the top. So he goes into fortune cookies and talks about that history. And it sounds like he doesn't know originally that they don't originate in China. It's definitely an American tradition. And then I guess first question, I'm gonna give you a hard question here, Joe.
Okay.
How does the fortune cookies help to deliver his message in your view? I don't have an answer for it, but I'd love to hear your take.
He ends the talk with the fortune cookie friend, which, holding up a fortune cookie in conference, that's got to be a first, right? Yeah. I've seen Elder Holland hold the very Book of Mormon that Hiram Smith had or something. I've seen a couple. It's very rare, but a fortune cookie being held up, that's definitely, But I think the fortune cookie allegory isn't about like the wisdom in a fortune cookie, but I think what he's getting at is this spiritual triangulation aspect of he's saying, I grew up making fortune cookies and I thought that this was part of my culture as being Chinese, but turns out it wasn't. It was this American thing. And now it's kind of been adopted by everyone, but it's viewed as an American thing. Mm-hmm. And perhaps kind of a hidden, not so hidden message in this is there may be aspects of church culture that we have in our wards, that we grew up with, that we kind of hold dear and think that, that's the gospel. But what if someday we discover we go somewhere else in the church and they're doing something slightly different and we think, oh, that's odd, And I definitely experienced that with going from America to Russia on my mission. I was taught my whole life, Russia's the enemy. My dad grew up in the, Cold War era and he would always tell stories about there was this Russian girl at his high school that they were told not to talk to because they thought she was a spy and things like that. And when I went to church in Russia, there were some things that were a little different. The way that people talked, the way that people, even the sacrament bread after sacrament, people would come up and kind of snack on the sacrament bread. And I thought that was odd. And then I learned, totally fine to do that. But in America, that wouldn't go. And so that's a minor example. But I think the allegory of the fortune cookie overall is just, while there's probably a lot more to it with the fortune cookie friend and the wisdom that a fortune cookie provides, I think the way that I view it, at least, is that we all have our own aspects of culture from where we come from and from who we are. And some of those may not be exactly what they seem, and they may not be fully necessary or fully, part of the church culture as a whole. And so it's important for us to come to Christ as we are, but let him change us and not let small things be the difference between, for example, small example, in Russia, they love tea, right? They drink lots of green tea, black tea. It's a huge part of culture, but members of the church don't drink tea. And so they drink herbal tea instead of the black and green tea, which is permitted under the word of wisdom. So that's an example of taking the tea part of your culture and allowing it to persist, but not letting that, full aspect of your culture hold you back from living the restored gospel in its totality. And so maybe I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how I understand it. He has a footnote on the spiritual triangulation that makes me think that that's kind of what he was getting at. But again, with the fortune cookie friend at the end part, I'm not 100% sure exactly what the depth of, maybe it goes deeper, more folds in the cookie,
Yeah, more folds in the cookie. I like that. I think there's some truth to that. I think I can see it both ways. That one, it's an example of we breathe things into our church culture that aren't religion, aren't doctrine, and can be there. We bring things in our church culture that shouldn't be there. But then also we can add things into our culture that maybe don't originate from our heritage. You know what I mean? Like one of the things my wife and I are often discussing is what should our holidays look like, or what should our tradition be? Like, they'll have a cultural night, and for our family, our heritage is just a mixed mutt, like, so what exactly is our cultural heritage? Is we follow the gospel and cheer for Notre Dame football. Like, that's the first side of the family. For me, it's K-State, but it was me first anyways. So it's hard to, so a lot of our discussions about deciding, well, what should the purpose of this be? What do we want to build into our culture, or our heritage, or traditions? And I think there are really good culture, or really good traditions that are brought in that can help bring in things to life and help us make aware. But what you're saying reminds me, I think it sets up the situation where somebody can say, like you were pointed out, they could, let's say we have somebody goes to Russia and they notice them eating the sacrament bread after snacking on it. It's like, well, that's inappropriate. It shouldn't be done. And that becomes a stumbling block for them. Elder Bednar gave an address. It was a while ago to some missionaries. And in that address, he talks about it's important to get a testimony, but it's more important to become converted to the Lord. And that when you have a testimony of certain things, but haven't become converted to the Lord, you can find something out, or something changes, and that can really challenge your testimony. But if you're converted to the Lord, it doesn't matter if something changes. I'm converted to the Lord. And if this is the Lord's church, this is where I'm going to stay. It doesn't matter that people are imperfect here, or weird things happen. This is where I belong. And this is where the Lord wants me.
For sure. And I don't know if you've heard this, but President Oaks has been going around to different wards randomly in Utah on kind of Sundays where he doesn't have an assignment. Mm-hmm. And the message that he's been giving is trust in the Lord. He loves to say there's a lot of things we don't have answers to. Trust in the Lord. And I would extend that to trust in the brethren, because they've got the keys, And so by trusting the brethren, we can trust in the Lord. And even though nobody's perfect, and we're talking about how we don't fully understand Elder Gong's talk, right? Mm-hmm. But his talk's going to point us to Christ. And so we can trust that because we believe in the keys and the office that he holds as an apostle. And so that's why it's great we're talking about it,
Yeah. No, I completely agree. That's cool that he's going around to random wards. We had,
I'd be terrified.
So a few years back, he has some family in the area where I live. But so we've been told that sometimes he shows up. We'll 10-hour ward or other wards, that kind of stuff. And so one day we're late. At the time, we only had 3 kids, I think. And so we get in late. We sit so if you're front in the stand, we sit in the far left side. That's where we sat. We're seated. And somebody's like, and then President Oaks will speak. I'm like, we don't have a President Oaks. I'm like, what are they? There's somebody, but where we're sitting, we can't see the stand. And then sure enough, after the sacrament's passed, President Oaks gets up and speaks. I'm like, what the? So it was cool. It was really cool to meet him and his
That's
mom
awesome.
And say hi just real quick. So that's fun that he pops in there.
Yeah.
That'll probably never happen again in my life out here in Chicago. So
yeah, I'd be terrified if I was the bishop or whoever's conducting, President Oaks walks in right before, says, by the way, I'm taking over your meeting,
I would feel great. I'm like, sweet, that's great.
Now I don't have to do anything.
You're presiding. It's on you now, bud.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. I thought it was also cool. So he talks about the allegory of the olive tree and brings that in. I really like that.
Yeah, and he mentioned roots and branches. I'd never heard, at least I don't remember ever hearing that way of interpreting the allegory of the olive tree, of developing your roots and your branches. And I thought that was really interesting. I still need to dive deeper into that, because I don't remember if Jacob 5 even addresses that particular issue, other than the grafting of the branches and things like that. But thinking about the roots of a tree versus the branches of the tree, maybe there's some family history ties in there. Temple, I don't know.
I wasn't sure what he was getting. There's a lot of conversation about the roots overpowering the branches and the branches overpowering the roots. So the two need to be combined. But if we take that to this example about culture and heritage, we can't let our roots, our heritage, you could say, overpower our decisions. Like, well, this is what we've always done. It's part of my Irish heritage. A Russian individual could say, look, tea has been part of our culture and I'm not giving that up for the gospel of Jesus Christ, right?
Yeah.
They could, and people could say in this day and age would say, yeah, I understand that, And I don't know a whole lot about Russian history, but I've read a little bit about it. Fascinating history, fascinating people. And I get that, I get not wanting to give that up. But at the same time, this is one of those areas where you want those branches, the gospel of Jesus Christ, to let you change. And I think your example, the way is, okay, how do we adapt this,
Yeah, you don't have to give it all up.
Yeah.
But some things you do. There may be parts of your roots that unfortunately they aren't compatible with the gospel. And
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
it's just how it is. No, that's just, I just was going to say that's just how it is. There may be things you've done that you have to stop doing, and it's worth it to follow Jesus Christ.
Very, very true. There's this great, if I was really a scriptorian, I could find a few, but I believe it's Mormon or Moroni speaking, and they said something about the fact that there are no faults in this book. And if there are faults, don't condemn the Lord. And then he says something to the effect of, be grateful that you can see the faults and our shortcomings, and then you can learn from and do differently.
Yeah.
And I think what's powerful about that is, in this day and age, it is very popular. It probably has always been popular. It's probably part of human nature to make ourselves feel better, to tear down prior generations. Like, oh my gosh, did you see what these people did, a decade ago, generations ago? Like, I can't believe they would make those decisions, right? But instead, if we take Mormon's words, I think it was Mormon, we can see where they fell short and we can learn from it. Like, what an opportunity to learn from those shortcomings. And I'm sure the future generations will be able to have plenty of opportunities to learn from our mistakes and shortcomings. And I think that's a way to look at the traditions of one's culture that maybe don't align with the gospel. Say, the tradition started for a reason. We can honor the reason it started, maybe, but we can say, I've got further light and understanding, and I bet my ancestors would be happy about that. So I'm going to abandon those parts of my heritage or culture that don't align with the gospel or that take me away from the Lord.
Those people on the other side of the veil that started those traditions probably want you to abandon them if they're going to keep you from getting to the temple and doing the work for them. So maybe that gathering Israel on both sides of the veil kind of ties in here to, just because something's part of our culture doesn't mean it needs to continue. But like you also mentioned, there are parts that we should bring in and that will add to the body of Christ and will help us to create eventually that Zion community. Everybody's got truth. We just need to get that fullness and add it upon, but also, I don't know, Joseph Smith always talked about himself as a rough stone rolling, right?
Mm-hmm.
And things being cut away, chipped away from himself. But part of that is also just polishing the parts of us that are good,
Yeah. No, very true. Very true. If you're okay, I'd like to share a part of Elder Gong's talk and then talk about that. Does that work for you? All right.
Yeah, that's great.
He says, in his restored church, we are all better when no one sits alone. Let us not simply accommodate or tolerate. Let us genuinely welcome, acknowledge, minister to, love. May each friend, sister, brother not be a foreigner or stranger, but a child at home. So my question, Joe, is what do we do here? Like, obviously, if somebody's sitting alone, go talk to them, invite them to sit with you or sit with them. But where are the areas that are easiest to start to apply this? And what are the areas where it's hardest and where maybe we need to put the most effort?
I think the most direct application that he mentioned was the literal aspect of his talk. No one sits alone. Let's start by just actually visually, we can see it with our eyes. If we see somebody alone, go talk to them. That seems like the most direct application of just people don't talk to each other anymore. We're all on our phones. That person that's sitting alone, I'd bet a lot of money that they're probably scrolling on their phone. And if you just go up, give them a pat on the back or shake their hand, whatever fits your style of communicating, and just go sit by them and say hi. you don't even necessarily need, Elder Gong says, and sit by them too. But I think even a smaller way of starting is at least say hi. I think we should sit by them. We should find people to sit. As a missionary, you're taught, find people for your investigator, your friends you're teaching to, members of the church to go sit by them and things like that. But at the very least, go say hi to people. There's always members of my wards that they're not the bishop. They're not trying to be bishop. They've already been a bishop or something. And they go around and they just shake everybody's hand. It's just a cultural thing for them that they go to church. They're excited to see everybody. And I always appreciate when they come up and just say hi. It creates this welcoming aspect. But I've also been in wards where nobody cared whether we were there or not. My wife and I did an internship, and we were in a ward where it kind of felt like it didn't matter whether we were there or not. Nobody really cared if we showed up. And I remember feeling, even though I'm with my wife and kid, not alone. As Elder Gong talks about, you can be with people but still feel alone. And that's kind of what I was feeling. And so I think the most direct application has to be just saying hi to people, sitting with them. But then the deeper aspect is the more spiritual, intellectual, like having those conversations with people that feel like they're not fitting into the gospel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But what do you? I think that's great. I think that's spot on. But I think in our but in our divisive world today, and culture and media today, I feel like the challenge is, what about the situation where this is somebody maybe you've had disagreements with, or you have very different viewpoints on? What do you do in those situations? How do you look past the differences and not simply accommodate, tolerate, but genuinely welcome, acknowledge, minister to, and love?
I think you have to validate the other person's feelings. Even if you don't agree with them, you have to acknowledge that they're a human being that has their own thoughts, their own desires, their own opinions on things, and just acknowledging I totally understand that that's how you view things. Trying to steel man their position, understanding exactly what, they're saying and listening to them, and then being okay saying, I disagree with you, but let's go have lunch. You don't have to be, you don't have to let those differences, even if they're really sharp, divide you, because at the end of the day, we all have different opinions on things, especially in the church. If I posted on X something that is as simple as a handbook provision that people disagree with, it's going to cause this disagreement. But if you recognize your commonality as children of God or as members of the church, if you can find, we all have some common ground, right? Even if it's somebody outside of the church, we're all children of God, or we're all American, or we're all from whatever state we're from, or we're both human, at the most basic level. Starting from there has to be the way, humanizing everybody and not using rhetoric that's going to dehumanize others. It has to be important as well in that.
Yeah, I agree. It can be difficult to, I like the point about steel manning their argument, like in their position. And I think too often, I feel sometimes, not necessarily online, but people in person, I'm kind of dismissed, like, oh, you have those ideas or viewpoints. And I'm like, I'm not an idiot. I feel like I've lived a little bit. I've got some experience. I've got some education. Like, I'm not an idiot. Like, could you maybe assume that I have some sound thinking that's led me to these viewpoints and beliefs? I mean, maybe I'm missing something, right? That's fair, but it can be hard to, I mean, it goes both ways. So, you've got to have the same view of others, that they have a set of logic and logical points to them and viewpoints that leads them to this conclusion, and something is driving that. And maybe we can turn on the curiosity to understand it better, but then also not forget the humanity of the individual, who they are, what's important to them. They have kids, or they have parents that love them, brothers and sisters, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And yeah, it's just, there are some people that are not going to be willing to have those types of conversations. And I think it's important to be able to recognize that when somebody's goal in a conversation is just to bulldoze over you, being willing to walk away from those conversations and, even if they're saying, "Oh, you're not willing to talk." You just have to have that kind of self-awareness within a conversation to say, yeah, like,
Yeah.
if you're not willing to have a civil dialogue, then, let's not talk about this any further. Let's just go do something else, but trying to get to that point.
Yeah. I've had a couple situations where I think in today's world, it's the popular message is, oh, cut those people out of your life. Like, if you don't get along with them, like, they're bringing you down, that kind of thing. And I don't think that's fair. I think there's value in having some difficult conversations or friends that are different from you. Or I think one of the things that's missed is to have any relationship with anybody, it takes a degree of sacrifice. So I'm willing to give up time, do things that maybe I don't want to do because I want to make sure there's a relationship, right? You have to, in some way, put the relationship as more important than some of your individual wants. And I think that in some of those relationships, it's agreeing to disagree. And some of those relationships is agreeing to not even talk about it. Like, we have certain things we don't talk about because you or I or both of us get emotional, we get argumentative, doesn't strengthen the relationship. And the relationship's more important than me yelling at you in text form,
Yep.
And I think it's okay. That's okay to have that. Like, it's okay to be like, there's certain things we don't talk about. I mean, there are certain things we shouldn't talk about in society anyways, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't want to know about that stuff, but yeah.
No, I totally agree.
Wonderful. Another part, a quote that I really liked, and here towards the end, Elder Gong is, there's the President Oaks quote.
There you go.
Found it. So he says, Joe Smith taught this principle. He says, it is left for us to see, participate in, and help to roll forward the latter-day glory, the dispensation of the fullness of times, when the saints of God will be gathered in one from every nation and kindred and people. God doeth not anything, save it be for the benefit of the world, that he may draw all men and women unto him. He inviteth them all to come unto him and partake of his goodness, and all are alike unto God. Conversion in Jesus Christ requires us to put off the natural man and worldly culture. What are your thoughts about the quote he shares with Joe Smith, that God doesn't do anything save for the benefit of man, and then his invitation, Elder Gong's invitation, to put off the natural man and worldly culture?
Yeah, it's definitely this put off the natural man combined with God, God not doing anything but the benefit of man creates kind of an interesting conundrum where we're thinking, God inspires men everywhere, men and women everywhere to do things and to have culture and to, languages are so inspired when you learn different languages, but we all need to partake of his goodness and find the truth. Mm-hmm. And maybe the middle ground there is the fact that maybe God places truth. Well, we have the fullness of truth through the Book of Mormon and the Restoration, but maybe God inspires things in different places so that we can go find it. Mm. And I haven't fully fleshed this idea out, but I know, for example, on my mission, when I was learning about the Russian Orthodox Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church in general, there's obviously some big flaws with the Russian Orthodox Church, and, won't get into all that, but I found some really deep truth and some really, really cool value in the people's worship, and seeing these, we call them babushki, these older women that would just be so devoted. Every temple that they saw, they would cross themselves, and you could just tell how devoted they were to Jesus Christ. And many of them lived through communism, right? And so while we don't do the cross ourselves, that devotion is something that we can learn from. And every time I see a temple driving on I-15 in Utah, I don't cross myself. I don't do something, but maybe I should. Maybe I should not cross myself. Maybe every time I see a temple, I should reflect and think that that's the house of Jesus Christ. Yeah. In actuality, that's the house of the Lord. And so maybe this inviting all to come unto Christ and God doing everything to benefit the world, one aspect of it's just, find those nuggets of gold everywhere, and maybe we can come together and create something beautiful.
Yeah. I like that. What I love about this teaching is, this is going to sound like, well, obviously, Tommy, this is what you're going to say, but I believe this, but I had in the last decade or so really confirmed, the Lord really pointed out to me that wherever there are people, if anybody is willing to listen to the light of Christ and respond to the prompting of the Holy Ghost, the Lord will work through them to do good things. And I think that's an example. What I do know about the Russian history with the Orthodox Church, they were very resistant to change. Even back in I think the 16. When was Peter the Great? Was he a ruler in the 1700s or 1600s? Do you know?
Let me just quickly look that up. I can't.
I want to say it was the 15 to 1600s. It might
1600. So he was born in 1672 and died in 1725.
Okay, yeah. So he takes power just towards the end of the 1600s into the 1700s, right?
Yeah.
And
he was the first emperor. They were all kings, and he was an emperor. Yeah.
And the Russian people were very resistant to European culture. It was, in fact, the previous rulers, they were very isolationist, we don't want anything to do with them. They're weird. And on one side, it was negative for the Russian people, and Peter the Great pulls them into the modern, he just gets fascinated by Europe and shipping specifically, the Dutch. But because of their resistance to change, I would think, set the Russian Orthodox Church in a situation where they're not going to quickly abandon teachings. They're not going to quickly abandon things that would stay around for quite a long time. And I think your example of crossing every time they would see a house of worship, no, we don't cross ourselves like you pointed out, but that means she's doing something every time she sees that, and thoughts go back to her Savior. Thoughts go back to her religion, her beliefs. And I think we could all benefit from repeatedly going back to our Savior in thought.
Yeah, and I like what you pointed out about resistance to change. I mean, we've seen in the last 7-8 years, the amount of changes in the church that have happened, it's remarkable, right? And you see some of that. You see people that are and even myself with priesthood session, I'd love to have priesthood session back, but, and there's way more changes that are deeper than that.
Mm-hmm.
But some people are very resistant to change. Some people are on the other end where they're like, come on, I need more change. And it's this dopamine rush every conference, what's going to change? I want more. Maybe people having hope in future change. There's kind of different aspects of it. But I was reading footnote 17 in this talk in the Gospel Library app. Interesting. Elder Gong quotes the Handbook 2, which we don't use Handbook 2 anymore, but talks about principles of uniformity and adaptation could help strengthen family and his restored church in gospel ways wherever we live. And I think that ties in because even if we're going through lots of change, cultures changing, people change, having some principles and common ground, some uniformity to keep us united, and that core gospel of Jesus Christ is what makes it Zion. And that's in my opinion, one of the best practical aspects of the church is I can go to Moscow, Russia, or I can go to, Taiwan, or I can anywhere where the church is found. And there's going to be a sacrament meeting. There's going to be a leader that has the authority to authorize the sacrament. You're going to have holders of the priesthood that bless the sacrament and pass it out. And that core is going to be the same. And we even teach the same curriculum every other week across the world. And that helps us to find that uniformity, even though we don't want to be exactly the same. We want to have that same core.
I think it brings about, instead of, I wouldn't use the term uniform, I would use unity. Though sounding the same, we're studying some of the same words of Christ at the same time. We're contemplating those things at the same time. And I think there's power in that. But no, you're absolutely right. And it's got to be cool. What a unique experience for you to visit so many different congregations and then see what's the same. What are the things that ring true? And one of the parts oh, that's a culture thing. That's just a different way of doing things. I learned recently that in the early days of the church, the sisters prepared the sacrament. They would have the sisters of the word prepare the sacrament. And that now the teachers and priests, but that's by assignment. And the holders of the keys, so the prophet, could make the assignment that it goes to somebody else. a different group be given the assignment. And I think that's important to recognize that things are changing, but also to recognize what doesn't change. And what doesn't change is that Christ is our Savior. Those fundamental principles of faith, repentance, baptism, that get to the Holy Ghost, and those ordinances, those saving ordinances don't change. Yeah. No, I'm on both sides. Like, there's some of the change it's hard to see happen. I'm excited when it gets announced because I'm like, ooh, change. I get to be part of this historical moment. And then I'm like, I don't know. But yeah, fun to watch it all change.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, are there any other final thoughts or things that stand out? Or, here's a better question for you, Joe. What are you doing or going to do different now on your deeper review of Elder Gong's talk?
Yeah, so one aspect we didn't cover that I can quickly mention is the story of the young man, the young deacon that went to deacon's quorum with his new shoes and got made fun of. That struck home to me. I was one of the only I didn't grow up in Utah, and I was always one of the only, members of my quorum in young men's. And we had a lot of members of our quorum that, would only come a couple times a year or super inactive. But it just makes me so sad that it would happen where somebody comes to church and they're excited. This new deacon that's excited for a new opportunity to serve, and one experience, will scar them and will cause trauma and make them not want to come to church. And a lot of people, this isn't everybody's story, but a lot of people that leave the church probably had an experience where something really rubbed them the wrong way, whether it be a leader saying something or somebody in quorum or relief society saying something that they didn't agree with or something to them. And I really liked how Elder Gong himself said, each of us has done something, each of us has been hurt, and each of us has hurt. And this is an apostle talking. He's saying, we view apostles in this high regard, and we do, and we should. But he's basically saying, I've done things that have hurt people before in the past. I've been hurt by people. And what's important is to find that covenant belonging and to work through things like that, to try and avoid it happening in the future. And so I guess, final thoughts about this talk in the aggregate, just no one sits alone is also, nobody experiences things in a vacuum, right? We all go through experiences in different wards across the church. There's going to be things that hurt your feelings, probably. There's going to be things you do that might hurt other people's feelings. You're going to mess up. Somebody's going to miss a deadline. Somebody's going to say something in a ward council that you don't agree with. At the end of the day, we just need to, as Elder Gong said, knit our hearts in one and find a way to use that common ground to build something better. And so for myself, when I read this, how I want to apply it is, in my calling, how can I be that reliable person with integrity that finds those people that are sitting alone, and even not in my calling? How do I find those people that are alone and reach out to them? What can I do? And I'm going to start by just being less on my phone. So starting this Sunday, I'm going to put my phone in a bag, put my phone in my wife's purse or something maybe during sacrament, and try just seeing what I can notice. If I bring a physical copy of scriptures as opposed to a phone, and I'll start there and I'll let you know how it goes.
What you share is profound, and we could all benefit by doing that, especially, and you made a comment earlier in our conversation about people wanting to be seen and heard and understood. You didn't use that language. I can't remember what you said, but I think that's so true. You talked about the humanity, of recognizing others' humanity. I think that's really important. We all feel sometimes alone, and sometimes we inadvertently or maybe even intentionally have hurt others. But we could all do with reaching out to others a little bit more often and connecting with them and making sure they know that we're happy and being genuinely happy that they're there. So wonderful.
And that may take some prayer, right?
Yeah.
We may need to work on ourselves and pray for that charity to have.
Yeah. I always get locked up in initiating the conversation. I do much better when there's a formal expectation. Like in my work environment, I do much better interacting with people because I know what my role is. I know what my leadership responsibilities are. And I know the role I play. But when it's ambiguous and there's no titles and there's no responsibility or no work to be done, I'm like, I don't know what to do. I need somebody to tell me how to interact. And initiating those sometimes can be, and people around me would be shocked to hear that. I do not enjoy initiating the conversation. But yeah, I'll work on that too. Well, it's been great having you here.
Yeah.
Enjoyed our conversation. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Conference Talk podcast. This episode, we discuss Elder Gong's talk, No One Sits Alone. If you enjoyed this episode, give us a 5-star rating. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, and everywhere you get podcasts. You can find links to all our podcast platforms on our website, conferencetalk.org. Conferencetalk.org is also where you can follow us on social media. Drop us a comment, check out the show notes, find the resources we mentioned in the episode, and learn more about us, your hosts. If you want to follow me, Tommy, you can find me on X. And a big thanks to Latter-day Truth, our special guest today. Where can they learn more about you and the work you do?
Yeah, so main place they can find me is on X at Latter-day Truth. And I have a link tree there with some other accounts, but I mainly post on X. Feel free to send me a DM, ask me any questions, and I just love talking with people about the restored gospel.
While we always appreciate new followers, it's better to follow the prophets and apostles themselves. And remember, although we love speaking about the church and our leaders, we do not speak for them. Everything said in this podcast represents our own personal opinions. Join us next week for some more personal opinions on the Conference Talk podcast.